and on behalf of the Western Ontario Vegan Society, I would like to thank you very much for coming this evening. Before we begin, I would like to thank the Philosophy Department and Animal Liberation Alliance London for co-sponsoring this event and helping to make it a success. After the presentation, the World Peace Diet will be available for purchase. Dr. Tuttle will be happy to sign books, and donations for the event will be accepted. Before I introduce Dr. Tuttle, I would like to announce a few other events that he will be doing in London this weekend. Tomorrow from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., he will be presenting the World Peace Diet Immersion Training at the Living Center. Tomorrow evening, he will be speaking at Glassroots Vegan Restaurant, following a 3-course dinner, which starts at 6 p.m. On Sunday at 10:30 a.m., he will be the guest speaker during the Sunday morning service at Unity of London, and he will also present a workshop on intuition development there at 12:15 in the afternoon. At 7 p.m. on Sunday, Dr. Tuttle will be speaking at Plant Matter Kitchen. If you would like more details about any of these events, come see me after the event. Dr. Will Tuttle, visionary author and inspirational speaker, has presented widely throughout North America, Europe, and the Pacific. Author of the acclaimed bestseller, The World Peace Diet, which has been published in 16 languages. He is a recipient of the Courage of Conscience Award. The creator of several wellness and advocacy training programs. He is also co-creator of Vegan Palooza, the largest online vegan event. He is also the editor of a recent book on the intersectionality of social justice issues, Circles of Compassion. A frequent radio, television, and online presenter and writer. He is also featured in the hit documentary Cowspiracy. His PhD from the University of California, Berkeley focused on educating intuition and altruism in adults, and he has taught college courses in creativity, humanities, religion, and philosophy. A former Zen monk and a Dharma master in the Zen tradition, as well as a 36-year vegan. He is devoted to cultural healing and awakening, and has created 8 CD albums of original piano music. With his spouse Madeline, a Swiss visionary artist, he lectures extensively throughout North America and worldwide. It is my great honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Will Tuttle. Please give him a warm welcome.
So much, Michael. Let's give a big hand to Michael and the local groups that have helped make this evening possible. Thank you. And so I'd like to go ahead and jump right into our event here, and thank all of you for joining us here this evening. I know we're all very busy nowadays, and to actually come out and be physically present for each other, I think shows an important interest in what I feel actually is the most critical issue in our time, which is the consequences of animal agriculture. And what I'd like to do this evening is talk a little bit about some of the main ideas that I think are underlying the dilemmas that we have in our society today. How many of you, just so I have a feeling, have already read the World Peace Diet, the book that I'll speak about? A few of you probably, just a few. But we also, just as Michael mentioned, we have this other book, which is more recent, called Circles of Compassion, Essays Connecting Issues of Justice. The World Peace Diet actually just was released a few months ago in the 10th anniversary edition, so it's just come out, it's been just 10 years. And as we heard, it's been published in quite a few languages worldwide. The number keeps increasing. And it's very often done as a volunteer, it's pretty much always been done as a volunteer project in all these different languages, Russian and Indonesian and Croatian and Serbian and Hebrew and a whole lot of Chinese. We're heading actually in a couple of months to mainland China. It was just released there. And so we're going to try to go over there and veganize China. That sounds like a good project. Wish us luck. And And Taiwan, which is actually a wonderfully, people ask me the most vegan-friendly country in the world. I think it has to be Taiwan. Really a lot happening there, and Vietnam and Singapore will be going there too. But we're right now toward the tail end of an 11-month lecture tour that we've been on, traveling around North America. We only have another about a month to go, and we're doing it with no final push. We're doing 66 events in the last 60 days. So this has been a really wonderful opportunity to share these ideas. And one of the things I've discovered as we've been traveling to these other countries is that the whole vegan message is really picking up steam. It's accelerating. I think the momentum is building. We see, even in unlikely places, we were not too long ago, for example, in Africa, South Africa, we were in the Middle East, in Dubai, and in Eastern Europe, and so forth. And we're finding that there are vegan meetup groups springing up. There are vegan restaurants springing up. There's a much more, I think, flourishing dialogue about the health benefits of moving toward a more plant-based way of living, the environmental benefits, the cultural benefits, and of course the benefits to animals and wildlife and to each other on so many different levels. So the World Peace Diet, in a sense, lays the foundation for this because it focuses on not just how our routine meals that we're all eating in our society affect us on the outer world. And by the outer world, I mean three main things. One is our environment, one is our culture, and one is our physical health. But the World Peace Diet also dives into how this eating system that we're all born into affects the inner landscape of our consciousness, how it affects us internally. So I want to cover both of those things this evening. The other thing I'll mention here, just jumping in, I won't say too much more probably actually this evening specifically about this book. Circles of Compassion is a new book that was just released last year, and it's called Essays Connecting Issues of Justice. So I'm the editor of this book. I'm not the sole author, but I got about 30 authors together to focus on social justice issues. As Michael said, it's new, sort of a somewhat new idea, the intersectionality or the interconnectedness, or sometimes people say the entanglement of social justice issues and how racism, for example, sexism, ableism, heterosexism, classism, speciesism, and human trafficking, and all these various forms of social injustice and ways we have devised to sort of harm each other, how they're connected with each other and how they're interconnected also with the routine abuse of animals for food and other products and the mentality that's required for that. So it's an exploration of that. And so if you're really interested in that particular focus of social justice, we do have a book that a lot of people really love because it has, like I say, 30 different authors that are well-known in their fields focusing on that specifically and the interconnections between these various forms of social justice issues and how we can get to the roots of those. But in many ways, that whole book is built upon the foundation that actually the World Peace Diet provides. So I'm going to be talking mainly about that foundation here this evening, and then we'll open it up for some questions. So how's everybody doing? Can you hear me okay? Is this working, basically? Yeah? I'd also like to have Madeline, my wonderful spouse from Switzerland, wave just for a moment. Let's give Madeline a hand. She's the artist. These paintings up here are all done by Madeline. There's a whole, actually she has a whole folder here of 24 paintings. Madeline's a long-time vegan also, and her whole way of expressing, one of her ways anyway, expressing the social activism of liberation of animals is to paint them in a way that people can sort of see through their eyes and see the beauty that they are and see them as beings, not as things. And I think we all have ways. I think each one of us has unique gifts and talents and abilities that we can tap into and foster and practice and generate our unique piece to the puzzle that we have, that each one of us has something we can bring to this movement to help liberate not only animals, but to liberate ourselves and liberate our beautiful earth from the just tragic devastation that is happening here. But the good news is, really, in all of this that I want to share here this evening, that I think we are absolutely, completely capable of transforming our society. That there's nothing stopping us in many ways except for habits and traditions that are pretty deeply ingrained. But the good news is if you found your way through that door and you're in this room, on some level, I think you're pioneers in the sense that you're at least still here while I'm speaking. I haven't walked out yet. And looking at the devastating impact of animal agriculture. So that's really what I want to focus on here. And the basic idea underlying everything is that all of us are born into a culture that is organized at its core around herding animals. I've coined the word herderism as a mentality that is required of herding cultures. Now, we don't think of ourselves as living in a herding society. We think of herding societies being long ago, far away. Some people maybe were herding animals. They had their staffs and their goats and sheep, and we're certainly not doing that. We're driving cars, we're in urban and suburban environments, and we're a high-tech society. We're certainly not a herding culture, but the fact is we are a herding culture. There's absolutely no question about it. This culture is organized at its living core around owning and feeding and killing animals for food. It's by far the biggest activity that we are engaged in. There's nothing bigger than animal agriculture in terms of the impact on our world and the impact on us. It's just covered over. It's hidden. It's the animals now are stuck away in these stinking sheds by the thousands or tens of thousands where we never see them. And it's pretty much automated for the most part, industrialized and mechanized. But basically, just as a very conservative estimate, we're killing, literally, I heard it the other day, the newest estimates are something like 7 billion animals a week or some ridiculous thing. I mean, the numbers of animals we're killing are mind-boggling, especially when we include marine animals, which I think we should be including. So the scale of devastation of animal agriculture is unmatched by any other activity. And yet we're uncomfortable talking about this because none of us really chose to be part of it. This is the key point, I think, in many ways, is that all of us are essentially born into a culture where we are compelled to participate in mealtime rituals with adults who we trust implicitly, our own mothers and fathers and our relatives and friends and neighbors and our ministers, rabbis, our doctors, the media, every institution in our society, and all of the influences upon us essentially are unanimous in telling us at a very deep level that this is what we eat. We eat meat because we need the protein, we eat dairy because we need the calcium, and we are inherently superior to all the other animals on this earth. And this is there, sort of put here for us to use, especially chickens, cows, pigs, turkeys, ducks, geese, and fishes, and those animals. So this is what we're essentially is injected into us from the time we're little kids. If we go to any grocery store and look at the little jars of baby food, we'll see little jars of turkey, veal, and chicken, and cheese, and little hot dogs, and so forth. So it's very important, I think, for us to understand that when we leave here, we go out into the world, and we see people going to grocery stores and actually taking out their wallets and paying for meat, dairy products, and eggs, or ordering that in restaurants, that there's only essentially one reason anyone ever does that, and that reason is this, that we are following orders, right? We're just following orders that were injected into us from infancy by forces that are completely trustworthy to us as little kids, right? Our own parents. And they were also essentially injected with the same orders by their parents, and it's kind of come down through the generations. And this is something that's very difficult to question. I remember when I was in Switzerland a few years ago and was watching a mother duck with her little baby ducks, and I realized what she was doing was she was teaching her little baby ducks, this is what you eat, this is what you don't eat, this is what you eat, this is what you don't eat. They were watching her and they were learning, right? The most powerful, important teaching across all species, from parents to offspring, is what is food and what isn't food. So if anybody comes along and says, well, I'm a vegan, deep down inside everybody, there's this alarm bell goes off. You mean you're questioning my mother's food? Get out of here. I don't want to hear anything about it. But I think in many ways, it's a great thing that anyone actually goes vegan, because it means questioning the official narrative in our society at its core level. Animal agriculture is just literally completely enmeshed in every aspect of our society. And so this is something that comes in at a very deep level. And it's important to understand, I think, that what anthropologists understand, which is that the primary way that any society transmits its values from generation to generation is through rituals, right? The rituals of society. All societies have certain rituals, and the main rituals in any society are meals. When people sit down together and eat food together, that's where we're actually literally eating. It becomes the very cells of our bodies, these attitudes that we are now passing to us, and we will pass them on into our children. So what we have to understand is that we're not just eating foods that are not in our best interest. I mean, I think we're understanding this more and more clearly now as more research comes out showing that animal foods are high in saturated fat and cholesterol, and that animal protein is essentially acidifying and inflammatory. And I don't know if you've heard of this new book by Dr. Michael Greger called How Not to Die. He basically lists the 15 leading causes of death in the United States, and then and he has a chapter on each one and analyze, and strokes and heart disease and cancer and liver disease and so forth. And then he analyzes each one and shows essentially that out of those 15, 14 out of those 15 are directly caused by diets high in animal-based foods. There's only one that isn't, that's accidents, but the other 14 are definitely caused by animal foods. So the point is that the foods we're eating from the time we're little kids are not in our best interest in terms of our physical health. And that's important to understand. I've been a vegan now for 36 years, and I have yet to go to a doctor. Actually, I've been a vegetarian for about 5 years before that. So it's been really liberating. I haven't been to a doctor in all these years. I haven't been to a drugstore. I haven't had to go, buy Right Guard or Rolaids or Tums or Viagra or all these things people do to me. And I think, the good news is we're designed to be healthy. We're designed to thrive and have energy and not be sick and get all these problems. But if we're eating foods that concentrate toxins, if we're eating foods that we're not designed for, that are going to make us sick, we're being exploited. Essentially, right? The pharmaceutical medical complex is going to make a lot of money. That's why they make their money on sick people. So the idea is that, to take responsibility for our health. But animal-based foods, when we get to these little kids, we're getting these foods by very well-meaning parents. It's not in any way questioning their well-meaningness, but it's just that we've all been deluded. We've all been basically forced to buy into a hoax that somehow animal foods are benevolent or something. I mean, they're not benevolent at all. They're horrible. I mean, if you're a pig or a cow or chicken, you know they're not benevolent. But for us, as human beings, we think that, it's kind of rooted deeply. We think, hot dogs, that's good food for good people, and hamburgers and cheese, this is the real food that made our country great, or this kind of thing. We have to understand that all of this is a tradition that goes back a certain way. And I'll talk about that. I have a few minutes for that. But the other thing I want to emphasize is that not only are the foods themselves harmful to our physical health, we're also eating attitudes. And what I've discovered in my research is that the attitudes that we're eating are even more unhealthy than the food. I mean, the attitudes that are required to stab animals over and over again and destroy ecosystems and just keep doing it without looking up. The attitudes of disconnectedness, of might makes right, of privilege and elitism. And these are the subtexts of meals that we're eating if we're eating animal-based foods. The commodification of life, of learning to look and see things when we see beings. That is devastating to the poor beings who we look at as things, right? If you look at a being as a thing, then you can do anything to her, because she's just a thing. And we would not want to be looked at that way, would we? Would anyone want to be looked at as a thing, and by a superior species who can do whatever they want to you? You can't defend yourself. There's nothing more horrifying than that. But that's what we do. So that's not only devastating to them; it's devastating to us to be born into a society where all of us are taught to do that, where we're taught to suppress the sacred feminine dimension of empathy, to desensitize ourselves to the suffering we're causing others. This is a wound that we all endure. All of us, whether we're vegans or not, have been severely wounded just by being born here and raised in this culture. And it's the woundedness that perpetuates itself through generations and causes so much violence and misery and suffering that we're causing, and it's completely unnecessary. Eating animal foods is completely unnecessary. This is well understood now. There's millions of people thriving on plant-based diets, and once you begin to understand that, we can begin to see, wow, I mean, it's like the door is open. We can actually walk down, out of the door and into a bright new day. there's nothing stopping us except fear, being afraid of change. That's the only thing stopping us is fear of change. But once we see that there's actually nothing to be afraid of, the one thing I've heard over and over again, talking about this to people, when people talk about the one thing they most regret about going vegan, it's always the same thing. The thing that people really regret about going vegan is, dang, I just wish I had done it sooner. That's the basic problem. It's like, why did it take you so long to figure this out? And so the thing to understand, I think, in all of this is that all of us are products of our communities. We basically are raised in a community, and we are conditioned by that community, we're programmed by that community. That's unavoidable as human beings in any society. Their language becomes my language, their food becomes my food, their attitudes become my attitudes. This is what happens, whether we're born in the middle of the Amazon jungle or here. But we're born here, and I think the thing to understand, like Gandhi kept emphasizing, we can never have a positive social transformation without positive personal transformation. It really starts with us, each individual person. It starts there and it ends there. I mean, this is the one person you can change. We can't actually change other people. I mean, if anybody comes to me and wants to change me, I'm saying, get out of here, leave me alone. It's actually kind of a toxic thing to try to change other people. The idea is to change ourselves, and then from that perspective, plant seeds with what veganism is, which is loving kindness and compassion and caring. It's really, another word for veganism is love, and caring and respect. It's really about respect. But it's also about questioning the official stories and doing it in the one place I can actually do it. Sorry, that's my cell phone. And we're in a foreign country, and I have to put it. All right, sorry. Jumped off this. All right, so basically, what I want to say is that, like, the history of this, because when people hear these ideas, a lot of times we think, well, but on the other hand, we've been doing this for millions of years, so it must be right. I want to emphasize just very briefly in the beginning, this basic idea, like in the World Peace Diet, in Chapter 2, I have this chapter called the Roots, our culture's roots, looking at the core of our culture. And the basic idea is if we go back about roughly 10,000 years to what is today Iraq, in the Eastern Mediterranean region, we find a culture there where people for the very first time started to own animals as property for food. We call that herding. It was wild sheep, and then wild goats, and then about 2,000 years later, wild cows, and then gradually other animals. And so the main thing to understand is this was a huge revolution. The actual act of owning animals as property. It changed our entire society. That was, from my point of view, that was the revolution, and there have been no revolutions since then. We can, people talk about, the scientific or the industrial revolution. I mean, those aren't really revolutions in the sense that we can kill and eat more animals faster than ever. It just kind of it just sort of sped up the trajectory. But back then, 10,000 years ago, when people started to do that, it was a huge revolution, and it was slow. It took quite a few generations, hundreds of years, thousands of years, really. But what happened, I'd say about 5 main things happened. And I'll just say that again, just very briefly. Number one was that animals were reduced. It's well understood that prior to the herding revolution, human beings looked at animals with eyes of respect. We all know animals. Have you noticed how beautiful this earth is and how magnificently well animals are able to navigate this place? Have you noticed that? Anybody? I mean, come on. Have you seen squirrels jumping from tree to tree? Have you seen birds flying around and seeing something and going and getting it? And migrating thousands of miles. I mean, they have capacities that even today are completely mind-boggling. They're very capable, amazing creatures with a lot of intelligence. Intelligence being the capacity to function within the niche that we're living in as an organism. So essentially, the herding revolution was reducing certain beings to mere property. And as this went on, as the generations went on, these animals became more and more despised. Cows, today there's nothing you can say to someone worse than cow, turkey, chicken, pig. They were reduced. And all the other animals, too, were also reduced, because if I'm owning animals as property, I don't want to have some other animals around, like coyotes or wolves or bears or bobcats or prairie dogs, some other animals that might interfere with my property, my wealth, because, so anyway, so the reduction of animals, and then the second thing was this idea of animals as wealth, because animals became wealth. They became the foundation of wealth. The more livestock you own, the richer you were back then. And so what happened, for the very first time on planet Earth, animals were reduced to property. A wealthy elite class emerged because of that. You had this wealthy elite class that emerged, tiny wealthy elite that took control of the entire societies back then. If you read the first writings, that was this 3,000 years ago, that was recent, 3,000 years ago. I used to teach college courses in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the ancient Old Testament writings, the ancient Greek tragedies. You just read those books, the first writings, and it's very obvious. We have these kings, right? The kings. And why are they the kings? Why are they the rich, powerful kings? Only one reason: they owned the most livestock, cows and sheep. And so, and what were they doing? Well, they were not only controlling and dominating their societies completely, they were also inventing new institutions. They invented, for the very first time on planet Earth, it had never been on Earth before, until we started owning animals as property for food. The ancient word for it is gavia. Gavia is the old word that means the desire for more cows. That is the word for war. There had never been war before. So this was started as a get-rich-quick scheme by the wealthy elite. Now, the wealthy elite at that time owned a lot of animals. As I said, the old Latin word for head, does anyone know what that word is? The old Latin word for head? What? Capita. Right, capita. So this whole the economic system basically of capitalism as a proto-capitalist movement began with a wealthy elite owning the means of production of wealth, and then with all this wealth as stock, livestock, seeing another king who had a lot also of wealth in terms of capita, of sheep and goats, they would go attack, right? So for the very first time we had these big, large-scale wars. They attacked with the desire to get more wealth, right? To defeat them, so I could get their livestock, because livestock was wealth. And so whoever lost the war, and you didn't want to lose a war back then, it was disastrous, because whoever lost the war, not only did the livestock become the property of the victors, but now they decided, after inventing war, they invented slavery, because whoever lost the war, the human beings became the property of the victors also, and they were abused. Obviously, they wanted to impregnate them as quickly as they could, the same way they did the cows and sheep and goats, because the more quickly you can impregnate, the more you can increase the size of your flocks, increase the number of your slaves. This is all wealth. And so we have basically the arising of this culture of violence, a culture based on war, based on the wealthy elite eating a lot of meat and dairy products, based on men creating a science. The very first science on planet Earth, essentially, was trying to figure out how we can scientifically, systematically dominate female animals so that they will give more milk and give babies that are bigger and have more flesh and have more wool, because that was all wealth. And so this science of domination emerged, and then also women themselves also unfortunately began to be dominated, because men developed this way of seeing, looking at females as mere breeders, as just objects to be used to give more money, to give more wealth, more status, and began to see women as mere breeders to give them sons and to give them pleasure and so forth. And so this patriarchal, violent, warlike society emerged, where boys also began to have now the role model that they should emulate was the role model of the hard, tough, disconnected male. A man who can kill, who can stab, who can brand, who can abuse and fight and destroy other men and dominate powerful animals like cattle. That takes a lot of violence. And so this very violent, warlike, patriarchal society emerged in the Eastern Mediterranean and started taking over and dominating and destroying more peaceful societies that were more based on plant-based agriculture, and were more matriarchal, matrilineal, and it spread into the northern Mediterranean, to Central Asia, to Europe, and didn't stop there. As you know, it came to the Americas and spread to Africa. We just came back from Africa. I mean, I'm telling you, it's terrible to see now that Monsanto and Kentucky Fried Chicken and Cargill and Burger King are moving into Africa. There's an absolute war on elephants and zebras and giraffes and lions, especially. They want to get rid of. Animal agriculture has became, since the very beginning, a war against nature and a war against all the other animals, because ranchers don't want any other animals around except their property, because they might somehow interfere, and so it's like destroying their habitat. So essentially this revolution that started back 10,000 years ago, which is relatively recently, when you look at the big picture, spread, and it's still spreading today through Conagra and Cargill and Monsanto, Kentucky Fried Chicken and Burger King and the whole IMF and the World Bank. I call it the military, industrial, medical, pharmaceutical, media, banking complex. Right? We have this complex, and it works very well to concentrate an enormous amount of wealth in the hands of a few people, but it's devastating. We have to understand that it's devastating to our environment, to our health, and to animals, and to ecosystems, and to wildlife. So that's the basic thing to understand in terms of the herding society. And then just to understand also that animal agriculture is not, well, I'll say just briefly about the effects of animal agriculture on our outer world. From the point of view of the environment, just very briefly, because I can talk a long time about this. We have a whole chapter actually on this in the low peace time. But the basic idea is that animal agriculture is inefficient. We can grow a lot of grain and a lot of food, but we're feeding most of that to animals while people go hungry. And this is a planetary problem of immense proportions. Statistics on this are roughly 15 to 1. In other words, about 15 people can be fed on a given area of land if they're eating the food directly from that land. But if you're going to feed it to animals and then eat the flesh of those animals, it's one person. So it's about 15 to 1 in terms of land and water. Some people, the United Nations said it's 30 to 1 in terms of water. Some people say it's more like 15 to 1. But this water depletion, water pollution, soil erosion, and global climate destabilization, because these animals, what do they basically do? They convert grains and legumes to four main things: saturated fat, cholesterol, acidifying animal protein, and huge amounts of sewage. And not just sewage, but nitrous oxide and methane, which are actually far more powerful than carbon dioxide in terms of destabilizing our climate and causing a lot of disruption, a lot of problems in our climate. So, and then the oceans are being overfished. I don't know if you're aware of it. How many of you are aware of the ocean situation? Some of you? Oh, good. So I don't have to say too much. But basically, we're overfishing the ocean. We have these gigantic, trawlers, and the bottom trawlers that take up everything, mid-range trawlers that take up everything in the middle, surface-level trawlers that bring up everything on the surface. The fish don't have a chance. And so oceanographers are talking about the fact that the oceans will be completely devoid of fish by 2040 or 2050 if we keep going the way we're going. Because the demand for fish is not just for fish that we're eating directly, but they've discovered, the scientists have figured it out, that if you enrich the feed of cows and pigs and chickens with fish meal, then it's profitable. Cows will give more milk if they're eating fish meal. They'll fatten up faster. So actually cows are eating as much or more fish meal as we do. Even though I don't think any of you have seen cows trying to catch fish, but that's what they're doing because it's profitable. So we have to understand that this system is devastating, really, to these poor animals we force them to eat meat, which they would never do. It's devastating to their health, but it's also devastating to the populations of fishes. And so we're seeing, as the oceans are crashing, we're losing the lungs of the earth, we're losing plankton, we're also losing the rainforest. I just read the other day, very disturbing news to me, because I've been following the rainforest thing, and just about a year and a half ago, the estimate was an acre per second of rainforest right now is being cut down and destroyed. And the primary driving force behind that is, again, it's the same thing as people taking out, not their wallets, it's kind of stuck here, but anyway. When we take out our wallets, when we take out money, these are ballots, right? These are what we're voting for. I think it's very important to understand that the only reason this devastation is happening to our society and really to our environment is because we, the people, are voting for this. And so when we take out our wallets and vote for this is what actually drives it. It's not some system that's just going and we can't stop it. It's really us, our choices. And so the rainforest right now, because people are voting for meat, dairy products, and eggs, are being destroyed at an acre per second in order to grow soybeans. That's the driving force. and to graze animals, but mainly to grow soybeans to feed, to imprison pigs, cows, chickens, and factory farm fishes eat huge amounts of soy and corn. So this is the situation, so we're losing habitat for wildlife, and so that's another thing that's, I think, very important just to be aware of, is that we're in the middle of the largest mass extinction of species, also in 65 million years, a loss of genetic diversity because we're causing species to go extinct at a rate, we're not really sure how many. Some biologists are estimating 100 a day, something, we don't know exactly, but it's way off the charts, and it's because of eating animal food. So if we want to just reduce our environmental footprint, one action that we can do is we move to a plant-based way of eating and living. And I would say while we're at it, make it as much as possible an organic, and as much as possible a local, and as much as possible a whole foods. In other words, not eating foods that have a lot of chemical additives and preservatives and things. And I think this is a wonderful foundation. The more we can move in this direction as individuals and as a society, we create communities that are empowered to grow our own food, to support each other. Growing our own food, I think, is really great if we can do that. We live in an RV right now for this year for 11 months, so all we can do is grow sprouts. But when we get back to California, we have a food forest. We have lots of fruit and nut trees and vegetables and berries and herbs and all this stuff. And I think taking responsibility for food and growing our own food and supporting people who are doing that, it's very sacred work to grow our own food. It's beautiful work. And I think this is, in a sense, the wave of the future, is that we can reconnect with the earth again, and we reconnect with neighborhoods and communities, and begin to support each other. But the basic idea underlying all of this is to understand that animal agriculture, at its core, is violent. It's violent towards ecosystems, it's devastating, it's inefficient, it's wasteful. The animals who are abused, I don't have to say anything about that, they're horribly abused and mutilated and killed. But also people. First of all, because it's inefficient, even though we grow enough food every year to feed more people than are on the earth, that's a very important point, because the media keeps telling us, well, there's not enough food to go around. We have hunger, but that's just the way it is. Well, it's not true. We're growing enough food every year to feed between 10, roughly 10, some people say 8, some people say 12, say 10 billion people. No one argues that roughly 10 billion people. We have about 7.5 billion people. So why is it that we have roughly 1 billion of our brothers and sisters, other human beings, literally starving to death? We have these terrible food shortages where people are hungry and starving. Well, again, it's complex, but the basic idea is that people in more industrialized nations of the world, for us, it's not difficult for us with our relatively high-powered economies to drive up the price of grain on the world market and feed it to our cows and pigs and chickens and fishes. They're eating lots of grain. There's no shortage for them. They're eating all this and creating all this manure, all this devastation. But we've driven up the price of grain now on the world market too high for people who live in less industrialized nations, who don't have high-powered economies, and they can't afford it. And on top of that, they're getting pushed off their land. We saw this a lot in Africa. People are losing their land, and it's happening all over the world to large corporations who are using the land for animal agriculture, and so while people are starving, there's huge plane loads of beef, like from Ethiopia going to Europe every day while people are starving. This is the basic thing. This kind of injustice where some mother sees her baby starving, and not far away there are people that take most of the land, most of the water, most of the grain, most of the petroleum, and eat meat and dairy. It's just so unjust. It's just an obvious injustice. And the primary rule in peace studies, right, if you want to have peace, we'll never have peace without justice. This is well understood. So to move, if we can, our lives more toward justice is a great step we can make toward peace. And the other thing, of course, is the fact that we have people who have to do the work of mutilating and killing animals. And I don't know if any of you have visited stockyards or factory farms or slaughterhouses or these places, hatcheries, where people have to do this work. But it's really, in many ways, the worst work in our society. Is actually doing nothing all day but stabbing animals or electroshocking them, or kicking them, or stabbing them in some way, or hurting them, impregnating them against their will. And so the workers that have to do this work have basically the highest rates of work-related injuries and among the highest rates of debilitating psychological diseases like depression and suicide and alcoholism and drug addiction and spousal abuse and child abuse. So really, to just basically realize that if I take out my wallet and pay for meat, dairy products, or eggs in a restaurant or a grocery store, I'm paying someone somewhere to do the dirty work that I would not want to do myself. I would not wish that on anyone. It's really kind of work that brings out the worst in people. They harden their hearts and just do it, and they go home. And so they have what psychologists refer to as perpetrator-induced traumatic stress disorder. So the good news in all of this is that as we move toward a more plant-based diet, we can become part of the healing of our world. We can be voting with our dollars for foods that do not cause this kind of violence, where we can allow the oceans to heal, and the rivers to heal, and land to heal, and habitat and forests to come back, and wildlife to be able to restore their habitat. And we can have people do work that doesn't bring out the worst in them, that brings out the best. I think in many ways, if we can do plant agriculture the way it was traditionally done, it brings in many ways, it brings out the best in people. It's working with the cycles of nature and with the natural abundance of life. You plant one seed and you get thousands of seeds. This amazing givingness of the earth, this natural abundance. This is something that at a deep level, I used to teach college courses in mythology and world religion, and there's always this sense of gratitude for the abundance of this earth. And so that's a wonderful thing to remember. And then the final thing on the outer level is just the physical health aspect. To look at our physical bodies and just think, so what are we designed to eat, actually? If you look at our teeth and our digestive system and our whole physical body, and I think if we look carefully, we realize that we're not designed to eat animal foods, just like cows are not designed to eat fish. They can eat it, you can feed them fish, and they can somehow get it down, but it makes them sick. But they're not doing it because they want to, they're doing it because they're being exploited. And in many ways, it's really the same for us. If we're eating animal foods, if we're eating animal foods, we are being exploited. We're being given foods that will reduce our health, reduce our capacities. And so to really make an effort to understand what are we designed to eat, and realize that the basic truth, I think, in all of this is that as human beings, all of us are given this gift of a physical body that does not require any animal to suffer to get all the nutrients that we need to thrive and celebrate our lives on this beautiful earth. This is a wonderful gift we've been given, all of us. But the thing to remember is that we've also been born into a culture where we've been forced from the time we're little kids to take this gift we've been given at every meal, ritualize, and refuse it and say, we're going to just throw it right back in your face and stab animals and kill them and eat them. And when we do that, we cause enormous trauma and suffering to these poor animals and ecosystems and hungry people and workers and everybody else, but we also eat all that trauma. We're eating trauma. We want to eat that and feed that to our children. These animals are in a frenzy of despair and anxiety and stress and terror and just, and that's what, and we're eating that. We're causing that. We're not just causing it, but we eat it. And, how can we do that, really? We would never do it on our own. We never think of this stuff. It's just when we're forced into it from the time we're little kids, by people we trust completely, the blinders are slapped on, and we're just programmed, and we just follow the cultural program. It's very hard to break out of it. I think the only way we can break out of it, really, is by having examples of other people who have broken out of it. That's how it worked for me. I would still be eating meat and dairy if it wasn't for seeing people that weren't doing it. And so that's the key. So understand that our physical health does not require us to eat any animal foods. How many of you have been to the Grand Canyon in Arizona? Anybody? I know you're far away here, but quite a few of you are travelers, I can see. We were there recently, and Madeline and I, and we were in our RV. We came up from Flagstaff, and you come up onto the south rim, and there's magnificent vistas looking out over this vast canyon, way down. You can't see it. Far down there is the Colorado River. And I noticed there were these signs everywhere that said, danger, warning, never attempt to hike all the way down to the Colorado River and back up in one day. That is not a day trip. People die trying to do that. Don't do it. And so I said, no, I'm going to try that. And he said, all right, here goes. So the next morning I took off and I went down this trail. It's called the Brighton Trail, down. I finally get down to the Colorado River and way down there. And then there was a sign that said, danger, no swimming. So I took a quick swim. Turned around, Came back up, I was back up on the rim again, just before noon for lunch. And I said, wow, how did you do that so fast? And I said, well, the thing is, there's nothing to be proud of, it's just that these signs are not made for vegans. They're made for typical people, for eating meals that clog up your arteries with saturated fat, cholesterol, acidified animal protein, all that inflammatory, all that. You probably will die, who knows? But if we're just eating the foods we're designed to eat, we'll have energy. We'll celebrate our lives. We'll feel the gratitude and joy and abundance of the possibility of another day, of another day on this beautiful earth. And I think, when we give respect to animals and respect to other people and respect to ourselves and our own intuition, our inner wisdom, and let that be our guide rather than just following these stories that are whispered in our ear from the McDonald's ads and from the doctors, ridiculous suggestions sometimes. So, all these things to really trust our hearts, to trust the inner wisdom, and actually to trust our the rational mind too. It's, just from a rational point of view, we shouldn't be eating animals. It's profoundly irrational. But beyond that, it's profoundly, I think, emotionally harmful. So I want to just mention that. I mentioned it earlier, but I just want to go into it just a little bit more, just briefly. The attitudes that we're eating when we're eating animal foods, because I think this is very important. I mentioned the attitude of disconnectedness. Every meal, you have to understand this, every meal, from the time we're little infants, when we sit down and eat, we are eating foods where the basic ritual is, don't make the connection. What are you eating? We're eating bacon this morning. What's that? It's bacon. Yeah, what's bacon? Bacon. Well, yeah, but I know, what is it? It's bacon. When you get old enough, we'll let you know, but not now. Right now, it's just bacon. I was the first kid at the table. When my mother said we're having bacon, it was like, oh man, I'm there, all that fat, all that salt, yum, 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 I want to eat. And so, but if she had told me what it was, right, if I had said, what's bacon? She had said, well, actually, there's an animal, a pig. You've probably seen pictures of pigs, and pigs are remarkably intelligent animals. They figure they're probably more intelligent, actually, than dogs. They're capable of, they have deep feelings. They have strong emotional ties to their families, and so what we're eating is a female pig who was confined her entire life in a cage. She was, after a while, she was banging her head on the bar of the cage because she was driven crazy by being not able to turn around, and she was impregnated against her will, and they kept stealing the babies, and then finally they pulled her out, hung her upside down, and they stabbed her in the neck, and she was bleeding and screaming, and now we're going to eat her flesh. Can I have oatmeal? Can I have a banana and blueberries, maybe? I had no idea what it was. I just thought it was bacon. I didn't know where anything came from. And I think all of us go through a process of learning this dark secret, in a sense, this kind of this weird thing like this. The main thing we're doing in our society, we just sort of don't talk about it. We don't talk about that. And we have this kind of secrecy about all this. And don't tell the kids about what it really is. And so this disconnectedness of not making the connection between what's on our plate and what it took to get it on our plate really manifests, unfortunately, from the point of view of systems theory, for example. Intelligence is the capacity of any organism or any system to make connections that are relevant to that system. But if you have a whole society who's going through this indoctrination through these mealtime rituals where they're just learning over and over again, don't make the connection, don't make the connection, then we have, unfortunately, a whole society where intelligence, meaningful intelligence, is reduced to the point where we're using most of our resources to make bombs and weapons and create machines that destroy ecosystems, where we could be feeding and loving and caring and protecting each other. And there's nothing stopping us except the action of animal agriculture is devastating the world more than anything we're doing, but the attitudes that are injected into us in order to make us eat these foods reduce our capacity so that, unfortunately, we have a very difficult time stopping this march toward destruction. So what veganism is essentially is saying, I would like to make connections. I would like to actually look deeply and listen deeply and feel deeply. I don't want to just spend my whole life being shallow and pretending to be asleep. Because that's really what it is. Disconnectedness is pretending to be asleep, pretending that I don't know. You can't just pretend that I don't know what it is. It just tastes good, that's all I care about. This is just devastating to the natural intelligence and sensitivity and caring, sense of caring, that really are hallmarks of being a human being, to being awake, being conscious. So that's one. Another one, as I mentioned earlier, is the mentality with every meal of reducing beings to things, commodification of life. And so we create a society that will commodify everything. You know, we have a forest. It's a beautiful forest. No, it's not a beautiful forest. That's board feet of lumber. You got to learn to look at it with an eye, like an economist. And other people, well, they're human resources. We got to manipulate and use each other to get what we want. So we create an entire society based on domination and exploitation and commodification of life, of animals, of resources, of human beings. And we end up creating, fortunately, in many ways, relationships that are based on manipulation. So what veganism is essentially is just, it's nothing to be proud of. It's not in any way being any better than anybody. It's just simply making an effort to come home to our own true nature and to look with eyes that when we see beings, we see beings. And when we do that, we naturally have a sense of respect for them. And we wouldn't harm them unnecessarily. That's our basic wisdom. But animal agriculture hijacks us and just kind of takes us off on this tangent where we learn to just see a thing. We say we harvest them like they're just strawberries or something. So this kind of devastation to our intelligence and empathy is caused by animal agriculture and the commodification of life that it requires. It requires us to adopt this mentality. Also, every meal essentially is injecting us with the mentality of privilege and elitism, because the subtext of every meal is that certain beings are superior. That's us. Other beings are inferior. That's them. And we just, we're the strong, dominate, and exploit the weak. Well, this is something, this is like really serious, because every justice issue is about trying to heal that. Not having just whoever has less privilege be dominated and abused by those who have more privilege. But every meal we're injecting into all of us, all our kids, at a deep, fundamental, pre-conscious level, right into the cells of our being, this mentality of domination, exploitation, entitlement. Entitlement by the strong to dominate the weak. And so how can we expect to actually successfully create real societies of equality and justice when the meals are actually injecting us with the opposite mentality, that we're paying for it and we're eating it, we're feeding it to our children. So again, what veganism is about, essentially, I think, is to try to have a little more humility in the sense of not saying we're better than others, and to use them to try to create a mentality of inclusion. It's really, I think, what veganism is in a sense is an ideal of inclusion, to include all beings within the sphere of our concern. And the more we can do that and hold that and try to purify our consciousness of the wounding that we've endured at the hands of our society, I think the more effective we'll be as advocates. And then finally, every meal is also essentially injecting us with a mentality of the domination of the sacred feminine dimension of life. I refer to this in the World Peace Diet as Sophia. Sophia was the ancient Greek goddess of wisdom. And in my studies of kind of cross-cultural religion, the divine feminine archetype as wisdom is very well established. I think it basically refers to that dimension of all of us, whether we are men or women, that loves and protects life, that is receptive to a higher level of awareness, and that loves and protects life, like mothers, for example. A mother, when she gives birth to this little baby, that baby is now completely vulnerable and dependent on the love and care of the mother. From the mother's point of view, this little baby is nothing but a bunch of trouble. It has demands and everything else. But the mother has this unconditional love and caring, and just protects and nurtures and holds and feeds and nurses and loves this little baby. And that's the foundation, not only of a healthy family, but of healthy people. If we as little babies don't get that, it's going to be hard for us the rest of our lives. And so the foundation of a healthy people, of healthy families, of healthy neighborhoods and communities, and healthy society is this loving, caring, giving, protecting energy of love that women have. And men also, men know what it is like to love and care and protect life. But animal agriculture is based on the opposite of that. On all animal agriculture operations, whether they're large-scale factory farms or whether they're small-scale backyard farms, whenever a mother gives birth to a baby, it's never her baby, the farmer, my baby. It's always breaking the mother-child bond, breaking it. steal the milk, steal the baby, kill the baby, steal the eggs, steal their life, steal everything, steal their time. They're worth nothing. The bond is worth nothing. And so this is what we do over and over again. And then we feed these foods to little kids, and that shuts down Sophia, the basic sense of caring, because we don't care. We do not care about cows and pigs and chickens. And that's what we learn as little kids. We learn that we're raised in a society that does not care about the welfare of other sentient beings, whose interests are to them, as important to them as my interests are to me. How can we expect that we are actually mature enough to create a society where peace and freedom and justice are possible when we don't give it to those who would like to have it, who are vulnerable in our hands, and we just crush them? We just destroy them. But the thing to understand is that we do it because we're wounded, because we're just following orders. We've had our natural intelligence shut down, so we're just doing what we've been told. So to see that the time has come, I think we understand it. We live in a critical time. If we continue on in this way, as the species on planet Earth that is known for just destroying other species and dominating and exploiting the ecosystems and attacking and warring upon each other, it's because of animal agriculture. Animal agriculture is the actual action of devastation and trauma and destruction and violence, but it gets into our psyche and makes it impossible for us to stop. So the act of going vegan is actually, in many ways, a two-step process. Number one, on the outer level, the first step is to just say, okay, now I think I figured this out. I don't want to eat animal foods anymore. That's great. That's the first step. The second step is then to work on ourselves so that we begin to have all of our actions, our thoughts, our words, our deeds to be a reflection of the same kind of loving kindness that we're extending toward animals, so that we have that same kind of attitude of respect for other human beings, that we really live this as kindness and love for each other. This is, I think, the frontier for us as human beings, and it's not about blaming anyone. It's really about understanding that we've all been wounded, wherever we are in the adventure. Human life is this wonderful adventure. We're born here, and now we have a chance to grow, to contribute, to learn, to awaken, and we can support each other in that. And so wherever we are on our journey, whether we're vegan, whether we're vegetarian, whether we're pre-vegan, pre-vegetarian, or wherever we are, great, just to see that we have a chance to learn and to grow. And so the final thing I want to emphasize here is just the importance of community, because I think that's what I've been saying here. The only reason we eat animal foods is because of communities that we're raised in, and I think that's really the only way, the main way anyway, that we can heal ourselves and bring healing to our world is through creating communities of kindness and justice based on individual awareness. So it's individual awakening and then sharing this with other people and creating somehow communities. And they can be communities, actual physical communities, or they can be online communities, or they can be like we just had dinner at a place called Plant Matter. That's like, to me, that's like a community. It's like a vegan community there while you're there. Like right now, we have, like for 2 hours, we have a kind of a vegan community where we can talk about these things. And so that's the point, I think. I'll just, how am I doing here on time? Okay, I have another couple minutes. Then I'll open up for questions. So just to close here, this idea of community. I was raised in a typical community back in Massachusetts, back in the 1950s, eating the usual meals of lots of meat-dairy products. And I remember when I was about 7 years old, I just asked my mother, I said, Mom, the kind of food we're eating, is this what everybody eats? And she said, sure, absolutely. This is what everybody eats, no doubt about it. And I said, okay, I was just wondering. And then she came back a few minutes later, and she said, actually, that's not completely true. There are vegetarians. And I said, what? What's that word again? And she said, vegetarians, but don't worry, you'll never meet one. I said, I'm a lot older than you are. I never met one. I don't know where they get their protein. So then I learned that these vegetarians are hypothetical people that don't get enough protein, so they must live on another planet somewhere. I'll never meet one. And the truth is, my mother was completely right. I never heard the word again. I had no like little chink in the wall where I get some light in about vegetarianism or anything. I just, ate. I ate what I was told. That's what I ate. So, but I remember going away when I was a young teenager, maybe 13, 14 years old, for a few years to the summer camp in Vermont. I was affiliated with this organic dairy, this beautiful little dairy nestled in the Green Mountains of Vermont where nothing bad would ever happen. All good, good, good. But I remember at one point they taught us to catch a chicken. I remember catching my chicken. They taught us how to hold her, like this in one hand, and I put her neck through these 2 nails on the board, and then I have my axe and just cut her head off, and then let go, and then the blood everywhere, and you pick her up after she's expired, and you put her through the scalding tank, and you make the chickens. And I remember doing that, and it was something that I didn't like doing, but I never had any doubt that I was doing the right thing. I knew, because at that point, I had gone through, when you think of it, 13 years, the most intense indoctrination a human being can possibly go through. I was eating every day, 3 times a day, routinely and relentlessly. I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that God gave us these animals to eat. They don't have a soul. They are infinitely inferior to us. And if you don't eat them, you'll definitely die within 24 hours of a protein deficiency. So that's it. You just got to eat them. There's no other way around. This is the way it's set up here. And even a little bit later, when we were brought down to the barn again, and there was a cow in the barn, she didn't look too happy. And the dairy operator, who was this guy we all respected a lot because he was this guy that could do all these farming things. And he said, yeah, we're going to use her for meat now. She's not giving enough milk anymore, so we're going to use her for meat. And I realize now, I didn't realize it then, but dairy cows in general, they live about 25 years. But on any dairy, organic or not, when they reach about 5 years old, they're pretty much worn out. They've been pregnant and lactating simultaneously, which breaks down the health of any female mammal very quickly, right? They're impregnated on the rape rack. After 9 months, they give birth to a little calf. They want to just nurse that calf. The calf wants to love the mother. That's not going to happen. You steal the calf. You immediately impregnate the cow again. After 9 months, she gets birth again. You steal that calf, kill that calf too, impregnate her again. So after going through this, enduring this for a few years, they're just worn out. So we put a gun to her head, and just right there on the barn, just pulled the trigger, and pulled it again, until she finally crashed on the floor of the barn. And I won't tell you, it was enormously, grotesquely bloody and urine-y and feces-y and everything else. And but the thing is, I never actually questioned we were doing the right thing. Even though I ate the meat from that cow, I thought this is it. It made sense to me. So the good thing is, I went away when I was in college. I went away to college, and I heard there were a few vegetarians on campus. This was back in the early 1970s. Well, like my mother said, you'll never meet one, so never had one. But they were there. I think there were some around, some vegetarians. But then a few years later, as soon as I graduated from Colby College in Maine, my brother and I headed off to California. We got as far as Buffalo. And then we headed south, and we actually walked all the way down through upstate New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky, to Tennessee, and eventually to Alabama. When we get to Tennessee, we lived for a little while in a community that, at the time, was the largest hippie commune in the world. It was called The Farm. And The Farm in 1975 had about 900 people. They were mostly from California, and they were vegetarians, they said. We today would have called them vegans because they didn't eat meat or dairy or eggs. And so I suddenly was in this community of 900 people, and nobody was dying of protein deficiency. They weren't like collapsing all around, they weren't getting enough protein. I can see calcium, my bones are breaking. They were doing great, actually. They were thriving. They had probably 200 children there who were vegan from birth. That's what they did. They just ate. Like I said, they said vegetarian, but it was just all basically grains and vegetables, and they were all thriving. And so that was it for me. I mean, I saw these people. I asked the guy I was talking to quite a bit. I said, so why are you guys vegetarians? And he said, well, it's 2 main reasons. One reason is, most of the food we're growing, we're feeding the animals while people are starving, and so we want to eat lower on the food chain so there's enough food for everyone. And I said, wow, that's beautiful. Why didn't I think of that? And then they said, and then the other reason is, I said, what's the other reason? He said, the other reason is, do you know what the animals go through that people are eating? And I said, I don't want to hear about it. Don't tell me. I don't want to hear. But he explained briefly a little bit about the mutilations, the routine, debeaking and castrating and all this terrible things they do to animals. And so for me, it was like he kind of pulled the curtain back and revealed this secret, this hell that we forced millions of animals into continuously to suffer so horribly. And when I saw that, and then I could contrast it with these 900 people that I was living with, and we were eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner together, meals of grains and legumes and vegetables and things, that was it. I mean, that was it. I have never eaten meat again in my life since that day. He said that to me. It was a no-brainer. It was obvious. It's like, why would I eat meat when these people are doing great and I don't have to? And I found out when I talked to Madeline years later, I met her, and that she, as a young artist in Switzerland, in the same month of the year, also never ate meat again in her life in Switzerland. And then a few years later, I got out to California. I learned about the abuse of dairy cows and hens for meat. I became a vegan in 1980, and then a few years after that, in 1984, I decided to become a Zen monk, and I shaved my head, and I went to Korea, and I was living in this monastery called Sangwangsa, and I realized that for the second time in my life, I was in a vegan community. And this time, it was a little different because Sangwangsa, Zen monastery in Korea, had been practicing vegan living since the 1200s. For 750 years in that community, no meat, no dairy, no eggs, no wool, no silk, no leather, no fur, not even killing mosquitoes. You kind of, if a mosquito landed, it would be totally gauche. You kind of go, you wouldn't do that. You kind of take them outside. But the whole idea was, I realized it was based on this idea called ahimsa. Has anyone heard that word, ahimsa? Ahimsa is an old Sanskrit word. It means non-violence. And the basic teaching is, as long as we practice violence, right, as long as we harm others to get what we want, not only do we make their life miserable, we make our own life miserable. We actually hurt ourselves more than when we hurt others. And so that was it. It was like this understanding. And doing all this meditation, it's kind of like realizing through meditation, I really think this is important, that what we are essentially, if we really understand what we are, and somehow get a glimpse of it, we realize that what we are is eternal consciousness. That actually is far greater than we realize. And so sitting, from 3 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock at night every day for months in silence was one of the things that helped me to catch a glimpse of the nature of the mind. It's like the sky. It's free, it's vast, it's completely radiant and self-existing, and of the nature of light and of the nature of awareness and really of loving kindness, because we see that all manifestations of life, we're all connected, we're all related at such a deep level. And I realized that my consciousness had been colonized by this culture's crude violence, and I had been, in a sense, forced to live a life that was against my own values. And so through discovering the true nature of consciousness and really the eternal nature of life and of ourselves, and realizing that we're not just a thing, an object, we are much greater. All life is much greater than we realize. I remember coming back to this culture and I realized that the roots of veganism now went so much deeper, because I realized it's not just a preference that I have, it's actually the very essence of who we are as human beings. We don't see another person and think, how can I abuse them to get some pleasure? And it's not who we are. But when we do it with animals, it's also not who we are. It's something that's been forced upon us. So I remember talking to Madeline later about all this. I remember saying, somebody's going to write a book that will give the big picture of our culture's mistreatment of animals for food and other products, because I realized that it's so much more than just the fact that eating animal foods is bad for the environment and bad for our health and bad for the animals. When you get into the anthropology and history and sociology and psychology of this, we see that we have an enormous opportunity to understand our society at a deeper level. And so I want to thank all of you for coming. I know that if you, again, like I said, if you found your way here, you're already part of an awakening on this planet. And for me, it was the capacity to make these other connections and see the bigger picture, which took actually another 20 or 30 years of study. And when I wrote the book, actually before I wrote it, Madeline, I said to Madeline, I can't wait to read this book. And then she said, yeah, somebody will write this book. And then nobody ever wrote the book, so then finally Madeline said, I think if you want to write this book, you have to read this book, you have to write it yourself. So I spent 5 years writing the book, we started, and it came out, like I said, in the end of 2005. So I'm happy to open it up for questions. I want to thank all of you for coming this evening, and much love to you all. Bless you all. Thanks so much for joining us.